Hey there guys, John Campea here and welcome to my movie vlog, and this is a sort of quasi-special edition of the John Campea podcast. Now for those of you who follow the John Campea podcast on a regular basis, first of all, thank you for following the John Campea podcast on a regular basis. You'll notice I haven't had a couple podcasts up for the last couple of days. I have been on the road. As many of you know, my wife Anne, this past Friday marked the 1-year anniversary of her father's passing. And we decided to get out of town, get together with family, and we're out of town. So I'm doing this from my hotel. It's a little more challenging doing these things from a hotel, but I thought I wanted to get a video up today. So we are doing a John Campea podcast, and here's how today's going to go. I'm going to take 6 questions that you guys have emailed to me. How do you email a question to me? It's simple. Just email me anytime at thejohncampeapodcast@gmail.com. That's thejohncampeapodcast@gmail.com. Send on in your questions. I pick out 6. You can look in the description of this video and you can see which 6 questions they are. So with all that out of the way, let's jump into it with question number 1. And question number 1 today comes to us from Will O'Toole, who writes, "One of the things I loved about the Wonder Woman film was its World War I setting, because I think it made the film. So I was very disappointed when it was announced that the sequel would be set in the 1980s, because I feel that we have too many films that are set or subject of the 1980s. I think it would be better if the film was set in the 1960s and was about Wonder Woman hunting down Nazis in South America, and was also be similar to the spy films that occurred at that time." Well, thanks a lot for the question, Will. The whole notion, first of all, yeah, Wonder Woman was great. Now let's get something clear though. I do not believe it has been announced. We've heard people talking about the Wonder Woman sequel taking place in the 1980s. I think that's probably what they're going to do, but I do not believe there's been an official movie synopsis release saying Wonder Woman 2 is officially set in the 1980s. I think some sites have reported it. We've heard some producers maybe talking about it, but I don't think there's ever been a 100% official word. I do think that's what they're going to do, but let's not say it's been announced yet, because I don't think it's officially official yet. You know what I'm talking about. So let's put that aside for a second. As far as too many movies being set in the 80s, I'm not quite sure what that means, too many movies set in the 80s. It's not like every week there's a movie set in the 80s. You know how many movies are set in the 60s? There's a hell of a lot of movies set in the 60s as well. And here's the problem I have with your notion, set in the 1960s and she's hunting down ex-Nazis in South Africa or South America. I mean, why? Wonder Woman is not a superhero parole officer. Wonder Woman is not Dog the Bounty Hunter. She's not here to just chase down some cons. I mean, she is there to save the world. I think when the world is in threat and the world is in danger, that's when Wonder Woman leaps into action. It's not like, oh, hey, Wonder Woman, there are these former Nazis and they're kind of old now and they're hiding out in South America. They're not doing anything. They're not actually a threat to the world at this point, other than the fact that they exist. Can you go hunt them down? Yeah, because that's what Princess Diana Themyscira should be spending her time doing as a parole officer, hunting down Nazis. I don't see it myself whatsoever. And besides, I think what you're doing is putting the cart before the horse a little bit. You shouldn't, what you need to do is you need to set it in the era that you think best suits your story. And if they've got a story that hits its ideal pace and its ideal place in the 1980s, Cold War and all that kind of stuff, when you're talking about nuclear proliferation, all that kind of stuff in the 80s, if you're talking about that stuff, then you need to put it in the era that best suits your story. You don't say, oh, let's put it in the 1960s and then write your story around that. No, you come up with what do we want this Wonder Woman movie to do? What do we want? Where do we want Wonder Woman's journey to take her? What kind of a place do we want her to end up in at the end of the film? And then if you think that, hey, you know what? The best era for that would be if we did in the 1960s, great. But if the best era for that is in the 1980s, that's what you got to do. So since we don't know what their plans are for Diana's journey at this point, and since we don't know where they want Diana to end up at by the end of this film, it's impossible for us to say which era the film should take place in. So if they do indeed do what we think they're doing, which is setting the film in the 80s, then I'm just going to trust that that's probably the best era for her. So great question, though. I like the fact that you're thinking outside the box. Thanks a lot for the question. All right, let's move on to the next question. And the next question comes to us from Max G. And Max G writes, Hey, John, love the show and been watching since the AMC days. Thank you so much. Just saw your top 5 trilogies video. If X-Men Apocalypse ended up being good, would you have considered that in a trilogy with First Class / Days of Future Past for all-time best trilogy or honorable mention? Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. I can't remember the last time I was that excited for an X-Men film as I was for X-Men Apocalypse. Because the X-Men Apocalypse series is probably my favorite series of all time in comic books. Now, for those of you who know, I've talked about X-Men Apocalypse a lot. For those of you who don't know, Professor Xavier's son, Legion, who's kind of sometimes evil, always deranged, decides, I know, I'm going to get my dad to like me because I'm going to do something really good for my dad. I'm going to go back in time and kill Magneto so Magneto can never be around to be an arch nemesis and thwart the plans of my dad, Charles Xavier. So he goes back in time to kill Magneto, but the problem is Magneto and Charles are best friends in the time that Legion goes back to, and Charles sacrifices himself to save Magneto. So now X-Men Apocalypse imagines the world where Charles Xavier never formed the X-Men. And it's an amazing, amazing story with Apocalypse obviously in it because it's called The Age of Apocalypse. And it's fantastic. You should check it out. So I was so excited for X-Men Apocalypse and so disappointed. Like, look, I don't think X-Men Apocalypse was a terrible movie. I know some people think the movie is just terrible. I don't think the movie is terrible, okay? But I do think it was a big letdown. I was very let down by the film on multiple levels. And there's some good stuff in there. There's some good stuff in there as well. I'm not saying it's not. So the question is, okay, if they had made a good, like a solid X-Men Apocalypse movie, do I think that the trilogy of X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, and X-Men Apocalypse would belong in the conversation for greatest trilogies of all time? So to answer your first question, would I consider that a trilogy? I'd say yes. I would consider First Class, Days of Future Past, Apocalypse a trilogy. I would on that level because it's all the interconnected characters and the new actors portraying those characters. So I'd be down with that. I'd call that a trilogy, sure. But if it was good, would it be good enough to put it in the best trilogies of all time list? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. Because while I think X-Men Days of Future Past is a beyond exceptional comic book, I believe I put X-Men Days of Future Past in my top 10 comic book movies of all time. I love that movie. It's amazing. But it's not in the top 3, you know? And X-Men First Class, I like X-Men First Class. I think X-Men First Class is a good, solid movie, but I do not like it anywhere near as a lot of other people do. I just think that within X-Men First Class, there's too many things that are weak. And that means all the kids. Like, whenever X-Men First Class focused on Charles Xavier and focused on Magneto, when it focused on Eric and Charles, that movie was firing on all cylinders. Whenever they focused on the kids, I just felt the movie sputtered. And that's like half the movie. So while I like First Class and I think it's a very solid movie, I just think there's too many dull points. And so on that basis alone, if you had X-Men First Class, which is good, X-Men Days of Future Past, which is great, and then say X-Men Apocalypse was good, then you'd have good, great, good. I don't think good, great, good is good enough to get in the conversation for all time. Because remember, in my honorable mentions list, I had films like Captain America trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy, things like that. And even if Apocalypse was good, it doesn't put those X-Men films in the same conversation with the Dark Knight trilogy or with the Captain America trilogy. It does not put it in the same conversation. So now, if X-Men Apocalypse had been better than Days of Future Past, which is hard to imagine, but if Apocalypse was better than Days of Future Past, then we might need to talk about it. And then we might need to have a real serious look at it and a serious conversation. But just a good Apocalypse? Nah, I don't think it puts the X-Men films into that list. Thanks a lot for the question, man. All right, the next question comes to us from Jiren The Gray, who writes, "Love your podcast. Thank you so much. I watch it daily when I work out, eat, and clean, and it makes my life way better." Well, I'm glad I could help. Let's see, way better. Thanks. The Matrix trilogy is my second favorite movie series, and I feel like its sequels are underappreciated. What are your overall thoughts on the series? And do you think they should make more prequels, remake, reboot? Thanks a lot for the question. Look, I'm actually with you in The Matrix 2. I'm with you. I think The Matrix 2 gets a bad rap. I think there's enough really cool, fun, interesting stuff in Matrix 2 that a lot of people should talk more positively about. Like, I get it. Matrix 2 was a very different film than the first Matrix. And I get that some people were disappointed when they saw Matrix 2 and realized it was so different. It took such a departure from the first Matrix. I get that. That's totally fine. And it does have its weaknesses. I acknowledge that. But I think Matrix 2 is, like I said, is an underappreciated film. I think it's quite a solid movie. Not as good as the first one, but I think Matrix 2 is quite good. The Seraph character, I think, is just awesome and amazing. That fight with Seraph and Neo on the table, I mean, I think that's incredible. I love that movie. I love a lot of the new characters they brought into it. I love, a lot of the new actors they brought into it. I just thought it was a really good movie. Not on the same level as the first Matrix, but a really good movie. However, even though you and I were on the same team when it comes to Matrix 2, I got to side with everybody else, unfortunately, on Matrix 3. I was really radically disappointed in Matrix 3. I didn't think the movie sucked. I didn't think it sucked, but I didn't think it was a good movie. I thought it was a poor movie, and I thought it was not a worthy finale for what the first two films had set up. And on that level, I got to say, because that happened, I don't think the Matrix franchise is underappreciated. Everybody knows how good the first Matrix is, but I got to agree with most people that the third one was poor. And I'm with you on the second one, but even with me being with you on the second one is not good enough to say it should be considered that high. But you say it's your second favorite film franchise of all time, and that's awesome. That is what being a film fan is about. It's the pure subjectivity of film. You see things in art that other people don't see. Other people see things in art that you won't. That's the great thing about the subjectivity of film. And I'm glad you love it, and I'm glad you can celebrate it. I'm just not quite there with you on it yet, but it's awesome that you are. All right, thanks a lot for the question, man. We move on to the next question. And this one comes to us from Anthony Cullen, who writes, "Hey, John, how's it going? It's going well, thank you. My question is, what are your thoughts on the How to Train Your Dragon films? And have you heard any news on the third one? I really like the first one, and the second one is my second favorite animated film, Toy Story 3 being my first. Thanks, and keep up the good work." How to Train Your Dragon 1 was one of the most big, pleasant surprises I ever had with an animated film. I think the two that really surprised me most, because these two are not Pixar films, I didn't have high expectations for them, and they came out of nowhere and really impressed. One is How to Train Your Dragon, and the second one is the first Kung Fu Panda. Now, the reason I'm not including the second How to Train Your Dragon is because I saw the first one and I was so impressed, so I did have higher expectations for the second one. And the second one is great. How to Train Your Dragon 2 is wonderful. Arguably even better than the first one. But yeah, Kung Fu Panda and How to Train Your Dragon were the films that really came out of nowhere, totally surprised me and shocked me how much I enjoy them. Because it's not just great, oh, look at the pretty character design, look at the pretty animation. It was great story about the drama between a father and a son and expectations and what's your role and all that kind of stuff. And on top of that beautiful animation, the quote-unquote cinematography of them flying with the dragons, it was awe-inspiring. It looked gorgeous and beautiful. If you have not seen How to Train Your Dragon 1 and 2, you are doing nothing but robbing yourself. I would highly recommend sitting down, maybe this afternoon or tomorrow afternoon, just sit down and give them a watch. You will be so glad you did. As far as How to Train Your Dragon 3, I don't know a lot off the top of my head. I know a release date was announced a long time ago, but I think then they moved that release date. I don't know to what. So for all I know, they're in production. But off the top of my head, and I didn't have time to look into it, just my apologies. Off the top of my head, I can't think of much that I've heard lately about the project, other than I'm sure they will make it. It may already have a set release date. They may already be in development. I'm not 100% sure. But I love this question just because you were talking about How to Train Your Dragon. And that is a set of animated films. And I know that some of you poo-poo on animated films. That's cool. We all have our preferences. Nothing wrong with that. But even if you don't like the animated medium, I really do recommend you check them out because I think you'll be glad that you did. All right, we got 2 questions left. The next one comes to us from John Hayek, who writes, my question is about the movie Patriots Day. The movie was seemingly ignored entirely this past award season. It scored no nominations at the Oscars, the PGA, the DGA, and the BAFTAs, or even the infamous Golden Globes. There were a lot of great movies in 2016 for sure, but with a great critical response, fan response, and true content that seemed right up the alley of awards voters, I'm still baffled to this day for the lack of awards for the movie. Hey, look, I loved Patriots Day. I thought Patriots Day was wonderful. You know, Peter Berg and Mark Wahlberg are on a roll when it comes to working on films together, because their other film that they did the same year, Deepwater Horizon, I was also quite impressed with. I like that movie a lot too. And they just continue to work on movies together and they crank out good stuff. Patriots Day is a really good, heart-moving, exciting, dramatic film that does a lot to kind of stir the soul at the same time. If you haven't seen Patriots Day, check it out. I know some people are turned off Mark Wahlberg, but get over it. Just check it out. I think you'll really be impressed and you'll like it a lot. That being said, and as much as I loved Patriots Day, I was not surprised it didn't get any awards love. Because, you know, Best Picture, it wasn't going to qualify. It qualified, but it wasn't going to get into that top 8 or 9 or 10 list. There were just too many good films. Mark Wahlberg was very solid in the movie, but he was not in the top 5 best performances of the year. And, you know, Oscar nominations for actors are limited to 5. If you're talking about Peter Berg direction, Peter Berg did a great job directing that film. I'm getting more and more impressed with him. He's no longer that guy who directed Battleship, okay? Peter Berg is really rounding into a really solid, great director. Now I look forward to everything he puts out. But he wasn't in the top 5 or 6 or 7 best directors of the year. So, I mean, and that's what makes the Oscars so special, is that it is so impossible to win. Because it's not, and you hear me say this all the time, but it's not just about you making a great movie. Then it would be a lot easier. If it's just about you making a great movie, there would be a lot more Academy Awards. But it's about you have to make one of the best things you've ever made and then hope that it's better than other movies that other people put out that year. I mean, wrap your head around this. On a hell of a lot of all-time top 10 greatest movies of all time list, on a lot of those lists, you will find The Shawshank Redemption. Shawshank Redemption didn't win Best Picture the year it came out. Forrest Gump didn't. Forrest Gump is a great movie. Great movie. No business winning Best Picture over Shawshank Redemption, but great picture nonetheless. It's a very difficult thing. How would you like to be an actor who turned in the best performance of your life the same year that Daniel Day-Lewis did Lincoln? Or the same year Daniel Day-Lewis did My Left Foot, or the same year Daniel Day-Lewis is in any movie. How would you like that? Because it's like, okay, I did great, and then any other year I would have won an Academy Award, but I just ran into the bad luck that this also happens to the year that Daniel Day-Lewis is doing a movie, so I'm out of luck. It's tough. It is a tough endeavor. So, and I don't think just because Patriots Day didn't garner any awards attention, that does not take away from how good the film is. The film is still good and great and solid and totally worthy of your love and my love. But the reason it didn't get any awards love is because it just didn't get into that level. It just wasn't at that level yet, even though it's still great. Anyway, that's just my point of view on it. Thanks a lot for the question. And we move on to the final question today. And the final question today comes to us from Carlos Uribe, who writes, I must admit that I love your podcast more than most others out there. Well, thank you so much. I'm glad you have the courage to admit that. Is that a bad thing? Anyway, my question is, if Hugh Jackman is for some reason magically, let me try that again. My question is, if Hugh Jackman for some magical reason decides to come back for one final Wolverine movie, what do you think it would be about? And do you think he would wear the suit if he comes back? What would it be about? No idea. No idea. If he came back, it would be because he and the director have a great idea. And if they have a great idea, then they'll do another one. They're not going to just say, let's do another one. Okay, now let's come up with an idea. No, it would have for them, because that's how Logan started. Logan started with somebody having an idea. I think it might have been Hugh Jackman that had the idea. And that got the ball rolling. They didn't say, let's do another Logan movie. Okay, we're doing another Wolverine movie. Let's just come up with something. No. They had no plans to do another Logan movie. They came up with an idea and boom, we got Logan, which I still think is the best movie of the year. So that's how that came about. What would it be about? Who knows? Whatever creative thing crosses their imaginations, it would be about. And I would go to watch it because I trust this team. I trust these guys. As far as would we see him in the suit? Now, the suit is obviously the yellow and black spandex thing from the comic books. And I've been, look, you know me, I'm not afraid to say the unpopular thing, if it's my honest opinion. The yellow spandex suit with the big wingtip eye things, that looks great in the comic book. It would look so stupid in live action. It would look utterly ridiculous. Well, John, Captain America wears his comic book outfit and you don't have any problems with that because that design works well on the printed page and it works well on live action. There is adaptation. Just because something works well on a printed page does not mean it will translate well into live action. Captain America's outfit looks great. Thor's outfit translates, works great. There are some costumes that would not translate and would not look great. If they did a movie with Puck from Alpha Flight in the Marvel Comics, no way would he be wearing the black bodysuit with the giant P. They would not do that. They would adapt it so it would look much better for the big screen. And I never want to see Hugh Jackman wearing that spandex yellow outfit. Unless it's for a comedy bit and for a gag on the Oscars or something like that. I never want to see Hugh Jackman. It would look utterly ridiculous. Just my opinion. Maybe you think it would look great, and that's fine. If you think it would look great, awesome. But me, I think it would look totally ridiculous. Absolutely silly. Can you imagine how much credibility the movie Logan would have lost if at some point when Logan's running through the woods at the end to save the kids, if suddenly he pulled out his yellow spandex outfit and was running, would totally lost me out of the movie. Everybody would have laughed. So no, I think the Logan costume is awesome in the comics. I think the Logan costume is awesome in animated form, but live action would never work for me whatsoever. Anyway, guys, that will do it for me for this quick impromptu version of the John Campea podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Special thank you to all my Patreon supporters for all your love and support and encouragement and the messages and well wishes you've been sending me the last couple of days. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much, guys. Check the description of this video if you would like to become my Patreon supporter as well. There's a link down there below. Also, make sure you guys, since you're here, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Make sure you follow me on social media, on Facebook and on Twitter, simply at John Campea. That'll do it for me, guys. Until next time. Bye-bye.